sorry. I don't want to rule or conquer anyone. I should like to help everyone if possible. Jew, Gentile, black man, white. We all want to help one another. Human beings are like that. We want to live by each other's happiness, not by each other's misery. We don't want to hate and despise one another. In this world, there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate, has goose-stepped us into misery and bloodshed. We have developed speed, but we have shut ourselves in. Machinery that gives abundance has left us in want. Our knowledge has made us cynical, our cleverness hard and unkind. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent, and all will be lost. The aeroplane and the radio have brought us closer together. The very nature of these inventions cries out for the goodness in men, cries out for universal brotherhood, for the unity of us all. Even now, my voice is reaching millions throughout the world. Millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people. To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes, men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines. You are not cattle. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate, only the unloved hate, the unloved and the unnatural. In the 17th chapter of St. Luke it is written, the kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world, that will give youth a future and old age a security. To do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Peter. This is our October 7th biweekly radio address. I hope everyone's doing well. That was a segment from The Great Dictator by Charlie Chaplin, I think one of his first actual talking pictures of 1940. It was a satire on Nazism, very brilliant. A good friend of mine sent me this link on YouTube, actually, that had a similar mix, and it was quite nice. And I believe if you typed in Zeitgeist Remix, you'll find the individual who made the one that I made the impression off of. It was a great combination. It's interesting to note how these ideas really are quite old, the ideas that we talk about fundamentally with technology and unification. It's while there are many new understandings, there's been a compelling force to try and get humanity to come together in a productive scientific way. And that's really what we're still trying to strive for here. So, Jock and Roxanne would typically join us in the second hour, but they are on their way back from Europe, I think, as we speak, so they will join us on the next broadcast. And lots of great media slowly coming out of the UK. I've seen one as far as the Copenhagen video. I've seen one video, the Copenhagen video, but if anybody else has any new media, I've been in touch with them, but I haven't gotten that much from them. But there should be tons of interviews, and of course the actual events should be available, and they will be on the site as soon as they are available. Program note, this will probably be the last full Q&A show that we do. I'm going to start shifting the focus to chapters and to other relevant topics that are more specific. I think we have about 200 hours of radio show thus far, and I've answered probably 800 questions. And as I've mentioned before, there's a knowledge base that's being created, and that will be searchable, basically a glorified question and answer, which I believe should have a great majority of the points that are really relevant in it. It will eventually. I'm looking over the questions that I've been going through for this broadcast. I see, of course, a lot of the same questions. I see a lot of questions of people that haven't read any of the materials, but that's okay. I'm going to do my best to go through it. Before I jump into that, though, I've been noticing a lot of impatience in emails that I've gotten, and impatience in various walks, ranging from general mechanistic aspects of the movement to this compulsive need to want to move very quickly into what we call a resource-based economy. And I want to kind of bring everybody back down to earth a little bit very quickly. And, the best example I can think of are those beautiful medieval cathedrals that you see that, regardless of religion, it doesn't matter. So much blood, sweat, and tears went into these amazing medieval cathedrals, and it took generations to construct. Stonemasons, mortar by mortar, brick by brick, stone by stone, would fulfill their lives and build these cathedrals only to never see the completion and pass those tasks on to somebody else. That is the frame of reference that people need to begin to have in the movement. If you feel like you if you feel that this has to happen overnight, you're gonna injure yourself emotionally. This is something that you have to become. We're in the transition right now. To become the movement, you have to act as if you are the movement, and you have to engage everybody around you with the value systems that are implied by what we talk about. It's frustrating to me when I get emails of people that have all of these ideas, but they miss the central point. And people get into fundraising and they get into all of these other notions. And in the end, the movement is us, and it is only going to move forward if you maintain a disposition that is irregardless of assumptions of staples of progress that you would typically define. I'm not being very clear on this, but I want everyone to sit back and relax a little bit and understand that this is going to transition one way or another. But if you have an all-or-nothing mentality, which I'm beginning to see quite a bit of out there, it's not going to work. It's going to self-destruct. So I sit back and I see this as a process, a lifelong process, and if everyone thought that way, things would move actually much more quickly and much more smoothly. Instead of this impulsiveness that tends to keep coming to the surface, impatience and dissatisfaction. We're all doing the best that we can, and I'm actually quite happy with what I've seen. And I've seen those that are really dedicated, that really understand, stay the course, and I've seen those that are very impulsive, slowly move on, after usually some form of, insolence or some type of dissatisfaction. So it weeds itself out, I suppose. I hate to see it that way, but I'm seeing the movement form in a way that is going to be much more productive in the future. Mainly because those that are actually staying around, even though we are growing, are actually understanding what we're doing. So there's a lot more I could say on that, but I don't want to start rambling. But I get frustrated with the impatience that many of you seem to portray, and I don't think you really understand the magnitude of what we're trying to do. So put this on your sleeve and walk around with it, become it, and you have to alter your expectations based on the complexity of what we're actually trying to do. So let me jump right into your questions. All right. I'm just going to go in line here. Number 1. Peter, if you look back, what would you change or make better in Zeitgeist Addendum, or the video orientation? I ask because if there was something, what should be mentioned, I wouldn't do a mistake while presenting the information to other people. I guess maybe English was a second language. Basically, in Zeitgeist 1, there would be lots of expanded aspects and lots of clarifications because of all the misinterpretations that happened in that film, things that are gestural, taken hyperliterally, things that are taken completely out of context. Believe it or not, behind me there is what I would call a director's cut of Zeitgeist 1. I haven't taken the time to clean it up thoroughly because I have other things I'm doing, obviously, and that's not priority. But in time, there will be, in fact, another release of that with an expanded and clarified basis. Also, a reassessment of the gestures to fit the movement in a little more of a holistic way, believe it or not. Zeitgeist Addendum, hindsight, I think I'm pretty pretty happy with what that film is. You can nitpick about just about anything. And as far as the orientation video, I think the orientation video stands on its own pretty well. It's concise. It gets to the point. It's an introduction by all means. Granted, it's subject to interpretation like anything else, and people, again, as you'll find with these questions I'm going to go through, there's a lot of people that really don't fully get some of the points that are made. But I'm pretty happy with the way it's going, and then much more media will come out as we move forward. And of course, the third film will be very, very concise. By the way, the third film will not be called exactly Zeitgeist 3. I'm going to remove the notion of Zeitgeist as a continuum from that, mainly because I want the film to stand on its own. It will, in fact, be Zeitgeist 3, but it will be, meaning it will take the same content, same gesture, same overall structure as I consistently use, but it will have its own specific title. Only those on the inside will really understand that it's Zeitgeist 3, meaning if someone wants to watch it, they won't even know what its relationship is. And I think we might attract more people that way, because I know the controversial nature of the films and how they both have the ability to compel and to repel. Number 2, do you think people are not really guilty, or just to a certain extent, for their actions, because they're products of their environment and their conditioning? Also goes into the question, do we have free will? I think the free will mechanism is simply relative. And I think we've covered this quite a few times on the radio show, but very briefly, your sense of free will is based on a tool set that you have and harness. If you are not given the tools, proper tools to think clearly, or actually more specifically, if you're not given the proper proper resources to consider with your formal logic, with your reasoning, then there's not that much you can do. The notion of free will is based upon the idea that there's some type of inner aspect that you can choose all sorts of things, and you have almost infinite choices, but that's really not true. You can't really have free will. When someone walks up to you that comes from an aberrantly conditioned environment, say a southern type of, for lack of a better expression, a redneck type of environment, and you say something to them that is insulting, all they might know to deal with such emotionally is to hit you. Is that their free will? Did they make that decision, or is that the reaction that's been ingrained into them by their culture? Free will is based upon the information that one person has. So in that context, there really isn't a free will. However, there is choice based on what you understand. That's why having the most information is always the most profound disposition, or the most freedom-oriented disposition. If you know lots of things, then you have much more freedom to choose. And you could easily see how this manifests historically, especially in our culture today with the sort of dumbed-down aspect we have from the TV culture. Very few people read anymore, and they're limited in their perspectives by what they get from the general mass media. So do they have free will? Only to a certain extent. Their choices are based upon what has been fed into them. So now, as far as your initial question, are people really guilty? That, of course, is a gray area. I mean, in the larger extreme, no. People are products of their environment one way or another. There really is no such thing as a bad action. All behaviors are, in fact, consequences one way or another. Granted, some people, quote, know better, but choose to be corrupt. But there's a reward mechanism in society that makes that a reality. So there's an environmental aspect too. It's a difficult question. I don't want to pontificate about it too much, but I would say that there is judgment for people, and I'll definitely come down on somebody for poor judgment in certain areas because some of them, quote, should know better. But even in the larger extreme, they really don't. Every action is a reaction of some chord. So it's a unique question, and it's definitely one to think about. We're basically programmed machines with a high variable degree, and the people with the most variables tend to be the most, quote, intelligent, the most traveled people, the most that have the most experience, that experience the largest number of cultures. These tend to be less racist. You see it; it's pretty transparent. But it's a little bit of an aside. I'm going to keep going here. I'm on number 3. In class the other day, the art history lecturer was going on about how nature or technology will destroy us and had some ridiculous images from Terminator. I said, quote, why would something that intelligent want to destroy life, unquote. If the military created an AI robot so advanced that it could think by itself, do you think it would be their downfall because it probably wouldn't see the point in killing and work against the military? That's an interesting question. I would say that, first of all, it's based on programming. I think you're misinterpreting a little bit about the notions that we talk about in regards to technology and artificial intelligence. I know Jacques Fresco has some gestural comments he uses about machines, and basically his denotation is that there's no emotional aspect to machines, and why we'd ever want to program emotion into machines is beyond me. I don't think it would ever have a reason to be done other than for some kind of vanity reason. And again, true emotional reactions from machines would again be based on programming, and there wouldn't really be emotional at all. They would just be one more basis of cause and effect. So, I think your question is it isn't really relevant in the context of what we're talking about. We're not assuming robots have consciousness in the sense that humans do. Robots will be designated to do specific actions. So if the military wanted to program a machine to have a negative reaction when it sees, quote, another machine get destroyed, and the machine reacts and kills and defends whatever's destroying its partner machine, well, that's based on programming. That's entirely up to the programmers and the people that are creating the machines, and that's really the biggest point. We can use it for good or we can use it for bad. It's like the old Carl Sagan quote, it's almost as though there is a God, and he sits there and he gives us all of these options and technology, and it's for us to decide whether we want to destroy ourselves with it or use it for the betterment of humanity. Sadly, that line is always there, especially with something like nanotechnology, if you read about the possibilities there. Immense positive and, of course, immense destructive possibilities. That's where our value systems come into play. Number 4, Hugo Chavez has met with many Americans in the past. Have you attempted to contact him to present the ideas of the Venus Project or a resource-based economy? There are means that are developing to do so, and that's really all I can say about that right now. Number 5, the only way as a novice programmer that I can see a computer accept complex associations is by technically replicating the human mind. Jacques Fresco quote about this is that if you smash a laptop in front of 50 other laptops, none of them will care. The problem with this statement is that if a computer can make complex associations and it can relate itself to destroy a computer, define destruction, find a threat against it, and determine what a threat is and act against it. That's basically the exact same question that I addressed prior. It's based entirely on programming. So it's based on the intent of the people that create the machine and nothing more. Number 7. It's number 6. How are we going to face the caste system in effect in the Indian area without directly attacking religion itself? That's an interesting question. Well, obviously you can't. The caste system, which is a glorified form of social stratification based on birth orientations, religiously-based birth orientations, is absolutely insane. And it has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with society. As a quick aside, actually, that just dawned on me, I used to work for a company years ago that it was run by an Indian couple, and they slowly went under, and it was a really ugly scenario. It was a really ugly scenario, and they stopped paying all of us. They stopped paying all of their employees. They didn't tell us this. They just slowly stopped paying, and then months and months went by. No one could leave because they owed everyone thousands and thousands of dollars. In fact, I had to, as an anecdote, I had to take all of my work files away and hold them ransom for the $10,000 that they owed me. It was actually quite amusing. But that aside, there was an individual there who was lower in the caste system of the Indian family that ran the company. This was in New York, too, by the way. And they owed this individual about $30,000. And the only reason they didn't pay him, and they didn't pay a lot of people, but they screwed him the most. Why? Because he was in the lower caste. And this was actually relayed to me by somebody else who was friends of this individual. And he took the abuse, oddly. It was ridiculous. But caste systems are nothing more than glorified racist structures. Regardless of the type of organizational components that these religions maintain, this is an extremely despotic notion. You can't have in a society of untouchables and then those that are destined to remedial jobs and the worst type of labor. So it's horrific. In other words, that would have to be addressed in time. That's one of those very difficult notions that, you can only hope that time will heal those problems and people will slowly begin to accept each other as equals in the general basic sense. There's a lot of sickness in the world, and going back to my original point on patience at the beginning of this broadcast, these are the points that need to be thought about. So, number 8. I have a suggestion for the radio show. I think it would be great if you routinely gave movement members activism tasks. For example, let me give an example. You could invite members to contact their state reps in an effort to sway a bill in our favor, etc. What do you think? Well, I completely agree, and I apologize that more of that can't happen. There is, of course, a projects page, and there are the forums for the teams, and activism tasks do come up, and they are in existence. They're mainly just to contact media and try to get this information out into the mainstream. The moment we can finally get mainstream recognition in the way where, Jock can be on a mainstream television show and be taken seriously and talk in a very literal sense without mockery, this is the first step, in my opinion, is really getting that public awareness. But there are all sorts of other things, and believe me, I've thought of many, and it's going to come up. We have an activism team, we have a communications team, we have a creative team. I saw the initial prototype site for the Zeitgeist Media Project. It's going to be very effective, and that will be a hub for all sorts of media production. And those tasks of spreading information are by far the most important. There are other tasks, by all means. There are other problems that need to be addressed in an activist manner, but we have to kind of keep some kind of priority. I don't want people to just waste their time, and I think public awareness of the movement itself is still the most important. But I will do my best. Number 9. You have mentioned in many occasions in your films, radio addresses, and radio shows how many pointless jobs there are because of the monetary system. For example, anything related to law, business, economics, and theology. But could you please give a list or name a few occupations that may be useful, not only for society in this monetary system, but it could also be valuable in a resource-based economy? Sure. Any tangibly applicable fields of science is, of course, extremely recommended. I say tangibly because there are a lot of intangible forms of science, theoretical physics. While I adore all mediums of scientific inquiry, especially really sophisticated intellectual exercises, I like to bring it down to a level of application. So, industrial engineers, computer programming, robotics engineers, of course, AI programmers, anything that has to do with the distribution, production, of course, social planning. And on the other spectrum, there's the less visceral elements, such as sociologists, people that study human behavior, educators. We have to begin to really think about what's relevant in our thought processes and value systems and align ourselves and children accordingly. Education isn't just about knowledge and formal logic and critical thinking, which unfortunately it's not that much about in the current day either. There isn't enough critical thinking happening. There isn't enough hands-on stuff happening, but it's also about value systems, and that's something that is implied whether we see it or not. Value systems are perpetuated deeply in many in strong subconscious ways as well in the educational system. I personally am not a fan of the value orientations, the judgment-based orientations in the educational system, A's and F's, because it's without taking lots of other factors into consideration. If someone can't see the blackboard, you give them glasses. That's very natural. If someone can't hear well, you give them a hearing aid, and they can hear. But if someone has to read a book many times while someone else can read it once and retain the information that someone else would have to read a book 6 or 7 times to maintain, then there's something else going on. And it's not that they're, quote, stupid, or it's not that they're, quote, need to try harder. Oftentimes, it's the fact that there's just a different neurological organization than somebody else. So if someone has that type of problem, which is really comparable to, say, someone wearing glasses and someone not, does the person who doesn't have glasses, that can't see and isn't doing well, do they get the F? And the person that has glasses, do they get the A? That's something to think about. But back to your question. You want to focus on fields that are relevant to the creation of applicable attributes of society. Agricultural engineers, innovators in science and technology is really where the future is going to reside. in both systems, frankly. Well, actually, I take that back as far as the free market system, because the automation is going to come into play to such a degree that most people are not going to be able to move into these occupations and get money, unfortunately. In fact, that's why we have this advertising industry that's exploding, this information vanity industry. There's a really strange book that I read recently called Age of Access, the Age of Hypercapitalism, and it was written by a man named Jeremy Rifkin, and I don't really agree with this book, but it was a very interesting read. And he talks about that the next industry to emerge is going to be based on the selling of lifestyle, which of course is an absolute abomination. Lifestyle should not be bought and sold. You shouldn't. Basically, it was a world of social imposition of altering value systems, so people simply spend money on things that have to do with their lifestyle inherently, where all the world is basically run through technology and all the general monotonous labor is taken care of. But now we create a new industry where people just sell each other nonsense. And that's basically what it came down to. And I really hope that doesn't emerge. I don't believe it will, because I really don't think that even in that realm we can keep the unemployment levels above, 60, 70%. And once you get employment levels lower than 60%, you have a dramatic crisis. In fact, under 80% would be enough for a worldwide revolution if that was the case. And honestly, you already have that already. I don't know what the world global unemployment statistics are, but if you were just to use America as a proxy, and if we're 10% supposedly, even though it's really more like 18, 19% when you take into factor the actual numbers of underemployment, and you take into account all of those people that are no longer in the system, at what point does it become at what point is it obvious that the system has failed, or the system is in a transition to something new? So anyway, I don't even know why I brought that up, but okay, let's keep going here. Number 10. I hope I'm wrong, but I have been hearing from many sources that there are some indicators that the state of the economy is somewhat recovering, and many people have said that this economic crisis we are now in is something natural, and we might probably by next year be fixed. What are your thoughts in respect to how the economy has been doing the past few months, and how it may be in the near future? And if the economy does recover, would it be much harder for the Zeitgeist Movement to achieve its mission of spreading social awareness and to make the resource-based global economy become a reality? Well, first of all, the issue of the economy recovering, I don't see any aspects like that. That's what the establishment will continue to tell you. You will continually see Bernanke and the president and industry heads and the various talking heads of the news say, oh, we have gotten some new statistics about some recovery. That goes on. That was, in fact, I was just reading about the Great Depression, and that's exactly what they did every 6 months, is they would come forward and say, oh, we're getting better. And then a year would go by, oh, we're getting better. And it really wasn't until the end of World War II that things really recovered. Alan Greenspan came forward saying that we will achieve levels of higher than 10% just a few days ago, in contrast to all of the establishment talking heads. Of course, he's establishment, but since he's out of the loop, I guess he feels the need to be a little bit more honest. Unemployment levels are not getting better, and that is probably the most critical factor when it comes to the economy. Regardless of all the distribution production aspects, that's separate, because if people don't have the purchasing power to buy anything, they can't live, and that's the most critical aspect. So, first of all, I don't see any indicators that the economy is getting that much better. There are small indicators, but until unemployment starts to shift, then, that's not going to happen. Now, as far as the issue of it being a natural consequence, the boom and bust cycle is only natural in of the monetary system, and in the process of inflation, deflation created by, in large part, the fractional reserve lending policy, coupled with the interest rate manipulation by the Federal Reserve and all the central banks of the world. These ebbs and flows are natural based on the system, and if we do recover from this particular drop, this particular bust of the boom and bust cycle, it's only going to recover partially. It's only going to recover for those that are actually doing that are actually in positions that where they can maintain their occupations. I think what's going to happen is, which is what has continually happened, is that more and more poverty is created, but the focus of the economic indicators become more and more narrow. I have no doubt in my mind that, especially with the growth of population, that we're going to move from 1 billion people starving to eventually 2 billion people starving. 1 in 50 children in America are homeless. The foreclosure rates are tremendous still. So the economic crisis recovery is really going to be more of an adaptation to what would seem to be a recovery. In other words, I'm not explaining that very well. It's going to be people are going to become more satisfied with the recovery when it's not going to be back to the original levels that it was prior. And I think every recovery, quote, recovery we're going to have from here on out is just going to be a new position slightly lower than where it was before. So I hope that makes sense. Let me see if I addressed, if the economy does recover, it would be harder for the Zeitgeist Movement. The economy really can't recover as far as I'm concerned. In other words, automation is far too profitable for industry. And as all of these other problems continue to emerge, and the more problems companies have, the more they're going to investigate non-labor-based systems. This is exactly what happened in the Great Depression. And it was really amazing, actually. Productivity by the end of the Great Depression was skyrocketing, but employment was static. It was fascinating. It's really an amazing proxy, if you look at history, to see what's happening now and what happened in the Great Depression. So the economic recovery is going to be, my feelings of the economic recovery is that even if there is a recovery, it will not suffice, and it certainly will not placate many, many people that are currently having problems. So I hope that answers your question. Number 11. Like nature fosters diversity in life forms to adapt to a changing and diversified environment, is there room for diversity in approaches communities can implement locally to govern themselves? For example, direct democracy sometimes appears to be discouraged within the Zeitgeist movement, with generalized messages such as, "Would you want surgery to be democratic?" unquote. But what would happen if people from a city agreed with some aspects of a resource-based economy but completely reject others, and, for example, wanted to use direct democracy or estimated that the voluntary nature of work makes citizens' opinions and preferences relevant information? Are there mechanisms that would allow a distributed network of communities to coexist, share information, and cooperate despite differences? And would such mechanisms be useful in a transition phase? I would say that what you're describing is essentially the transition phase. Granted, it's always a transition phase. There's no final frontier here. And I think that's another confusion that I think a lot of people have. The transition is based on a point of focus. It's based on where the energy is focused. Do we focus on labor for income, or do we focus on automation of labor? Do we focus on division and competition between countries and corporations, or do we focus on people beginning and learning to work together for the betterment of everyone? Do we focus on resource exploitation for the sake of profit, or do we focus on the intelligent management of the Earth's resources in a conservative manner so that everyone can benefit in the most equal way possible? So the communities that you're talking about, yes, they would coexist, and I'm sure there would be differences as time moves forward. Those differences would probably begin to shrink. They would all share the same general mechanisms, I would hope. This will be talked about more in the third film, but the holographic nature, I won't go into that. The nature of the way communication is oriented between cities is equal, and everyone sees the same thing. Decisions, of course, can be made in a democratic sense as well, but it'd be a democracy that is very different from what you see today. I use the term democracy in a very different way. I think the choice is not based upon voting for leaders, which is democracy as we see it today. People would reach a consensus about certain issues in particular, not just leadership as we see today. That's when we talk about democracy, that is really what we're talking about. We're talking about this cultural phenomenon, this traditional phenomenon we have, not to vote for specific points, but to simply vote for leaders, which is what we do now, assuming that the leaders are in our best interest. And of course, that's really corrupt if you think about it, because especially the monetary system. But let me get back to my point of participation and decision-making processes has many, many sides to it. And once you get out of the monetary system and the influence of money, and you focus on tangible issues that would benefit everyone, because that's exactly the issue of democracy would turn into more of application of consensus. You could think about it in, for example, if someone wanted to build something, there is a formal logic that is, of course, under the surface of it. Is there a functional utility to it? And that will be, accessed by the central computer database that we talk about. And then, of course, there are human minds at work to consider the application to a certain degree. I think the diversity is going to get smaller and smaller based on the processes, because we're using processes of thought and we're using the systems approach that really limits variables the more intelligent we become. And it's a really complex point, and I think it was made fairly clear in the orientation guide as far as how this works. To answer your question very simply, will there be room for diversity and approaches communities can implement locally to govern themselves? Of course there will be. There's no overarching totalitarian enforcement, but there is a systems approach, and that system is based on formal logic, and those decision-making processes will have a path. And in time, hopefully, all decision-making processes will have a seemingly empirical path. So the diversity would get smaller and smaller because it's based on something that's near empirical. The intelligent management of the Earth's resources and a systems approach to provide a near abundance for society, both global and independent. Independent meaning, a city or a town. But the distribution of world resources has to be within a holistic system. The carrying capacity of the Earth has to be assessed, and then all methods of conduct are extracted from that through logical processes. Number 12. I would like to bring up all the 2012 metaphysical stuff being posted on Facebook by people whose names suggest they speak for the movement. There are several people on Facebook that continue to post all that prophecy stuff, and I think it makes us all look wacky. Please address this issue. There's only one official Facebook. I haven't seen anything like that on it, and I stay away from most of those community softwares because of how much noise there is. There's tons and tons of Facebooks and MySpaces, and I simply have no control. Anyone that, again, goes to the real site, the global site, the zeitgeistmovement.com, and reads the material should know very quickly where we stand. We can't, there's no way to police everything as far as correcting all the misnomers and confusions about the movement. In time, they will dissipate. Number 13, hi Peter, to what extent do you think education can be automated? What will motivate people to become teachers, to go to school every day and deal with kids? Education is not only about creativity, but also about getting the kids to learn and assimilate a lot of information. What are your thoughts on the future of the whole educational system? Jacques Fresco's talked about this quite a bit in other broadcasts, so I don't want to spend too much time on the whole educational system. Obviously, the focus moves from rote learning to critical thought, to the focus on also value systems. You teach kids at a young age how to deal with things like jealousy, if those attributes are being relayed still by parents. There's many different attributes to it, but learning process should be very hands-on. It should be tangible. When I first started learning mathematics, for example, I had absolutely no frame of reference for what anybody was talking about because the teacher was unable to put it into a tangible light. It was just an abstract language. It didn't have any tangible basis. It wasn't until years later I began to really absorb what it meant, what mathematics meant. So it really comes down to the way the system undergoes, and I completely agree with you. Education is not only about creativity, it's also about getting kids to learn to assimilate a lot of information. Yes, it's a vast topic, and it's going to take a lot of social research to think about the best means to undergo education. I think Jacques does a very good job, better than I do, of describing this. As far as your point about education being automated, I think there can be tremendous tools, computers obviously, and things as such that can very much assist the educational process. There's a lot of independence now in the world when it comes to education. I've learned more since the advent of the internet than I learned in any of my schools. You have a virtual university sitting in front of you just waiting for you to absorb information. It's incredible. So I think that type of incorporation, I wouldn't call that automation. Obviously there has to be an initiative by the student to want to learn, but I think that's a natural issue with the human being, which I honestly think is ripped out of the human being as time moves forward because of the slow perpetuation, the slow jostling into the monetary system, which is removes people from generalized knowledge and focuses them in specialized fields, essentially kind of shutting themselves off very often. There's no general knowledge is not sought. General understandings of world processes. It's my hope that most people, when they grow up in a new enlightened educational system, that they will have a vast amount of knowledge about many different topics, and they won't eventually be forced into one of those specialized issues. They will pursue what they find most interesting. And that might relate to your point about teachers going to school and will motivate teachers. I think teachers will be motivated to teach children just like people will be motivated to do research in any area. If the value system that you're born into, if you're born into a family where your father is not going to his 9 to 5, doesn't come home and feel exhausted, or not even exhausted, doesn't feel the drudgery of labor like many parents do. In fact, in this culture, both parents often have to work. And there's always this displacement, there's always this angst, there's always this depravity of family to a certain degree. Once that is gone and you're born into this value system where you witness your parents doing things that they enjoy doing, but it's not just arbitrary enjoyment, they actually engage society. They actually do something for the betterment of humanity. There's meaning to what they do. And I think once occupations, so to speak, have meaning and they have a social relevance, people will flock to whatever is necessary without the need for payment or reward. Not to mention for other types of, say, seemingly technical occupations, because of the nature of the automated system and what we propose, the number of hours that are required to get certain things done in society would be very, very small. Very small, nothing compared to today. Maybe 3 or 4 hours a day someone would be required, so to speak, to contribute, but it's not requirement in the sense that they're forced into it by any means. I believe a new paradigm will emerge where people will contribute to society because they understand their contribution and the meaning of it. And the meaning and the value and the reward will come from that contribution and not from some monetary incentive so they can support themselves and all the distortion that we see today. We're talking about a value shift and why people do what they do. Human beings don't have to be intrinsically motivated by material self-interest. This is one of the great realizations. And there's endless examples of this. People do it because of a personal satisfaction. And that Margaret Mead had a great quote, and I've said this before, that deep down, the things that people really value in their lives, the actions that they really value in their lives have nothing to do with monetary reward. They have to do with helping their fellow human being and doing something to contribute to the well-being of themselves and society as a whole. Number 14, can you elaborate on your position on Codex Alimentarius? I'm still surveying Codex Alimentarius. I see Codex Alimentarius as quite scary. I see it as a corporate collusion for food standardization in a form of cartel-based monopoly in the end. The fact that Monsanto is a big part of this behind the scenes is quite terrifying. Again, I don't subscribe to a lot of the conspiracy notions of Codex as it being some form of depopulation or stuff like this. I see it as a massive, powerful corporate move. And I'm going to talk more about that. I've taken a lot of information about it, but I haven't had a chance to really make up my mind as far as my impression of what they're doing. I know it's bad, but I'm going to bite my lip and not say things that are not fully thought out. Number 15, geographically speaking, where would be the best location to start the first test city of the future? Would it make sense to build in the United States, knowing that this is one of the most corrupt nations on the planet? The way I see it, if we do build here, we would be protected from other countries. On the other hand, do we really need protection from other countries? What is your position on the idea of starting our own country for the movement? Is that even possible in such a corrupt system? Best location for the first test city, which is your first part of the question, would be somewhere that's very lush, and ideally within a governmental structure, a pre-existing governmental structure, that has a socialist tendency, that wants to move forward and actually has an interest in change. I see Latin America, revolution in Latin America, as pretty powerful. That's really all I can say about that. There's lots of variables. Ideally, it's a private project initially. It would have to be. least most likely. But if to have the support of the government on some level would be good. No, I don't expect it to occur in the United States, and I think actually it would be more dangerous to be in the United States than in other countries, frankly, for many reasons. It would also be the most inefficient because of the nature of capitalism in the States. You mentioned, on the other hand, do we really need protection from other countries? That's a difficult question. I think if the idea was to grow and become a threat to the corporate establishment, it would not surprise me if the CIA jumped in with black operations to do something about it. All you have to do is look at the work of John Perkins and think about how dark and how sick some of the people are in society and what they're willing to do to maintain differential advantage for certain sects of their economies, especially the United States. I mean, the CIA very much represents Wall Street. If you need more clarification on that, I recommend reading Michael Rupert. He's done a lot of investigation on that specific point. But anyway, I think there is a threat by all means. I don't know what protection would exist. That's beyond my realm of reference at this point. But I do understand your point, and this is one of those difficult aspects. I guess the ideal would be to be in a system that has some protection, where the government is allowing the construction of the first test city as an experimental expression, and they are somewhat behind it, and in time hopefully are willing to make a transition into a resource-based economic structure, meaning slowly removing the monetary system gradually. Very difficult to do, and I'm going to talk more about that type of transitional process in the third film. And what is your position on the idea of starting your own country? Well, where are we going to start our own country? All I could think of is that go to international waters, develop some type of technology where you drop this massive block of expansion material and you drop it straight into international waters, you peg it down, you create an artificial island, a couple miles in diameter and build the first city. Well, I don't know how to do that. If any of you out there do know how to do that, wouldn't that be incredible? That would be because they can't touch you. I mean, granted, they could go to war with you. Any country could. But if you're in international waters, out way in the middle of the Atlantic, that would be amazing. But that also brings on a whole new set of possibilities. I don't think that can work. Plus, there are pirates and everything else. You can't really do it within the system without attempting to alter the system in and of itself. So, lots of complex points, but thank you. Number 16. When the Zeitgeist Movement takes off, how can you demand the scientific method when there are so many superstitious people in the world? For instance, some will still want creationism taught in schools, and how do you stop that? If one group of people wants to build a bridge for a good reason, and another group do not want to build it because they like the environment as it is, who would win? Would it go to a vote? Well, let's see here. The scientific method and the scientific processes will, by the very nature of its evolution, slowly weed out all the inefficient mental constructs. If superstitions, of course, are a great barrier, and I think Jacques put it very well. He said in religion, you wouldn't just have in one culture one set of religious beliefs shown, say, on television. Religion would be expressed in a holistic manner. So you'd have 5 or 6 major religions, all equally showing their time. At least that's the ideal. Equally presenting their information. It wouldn't be a isolated value system imposition, which is what we have regionally across the world. If you go to the Middle East, you're going to be fed fundamentally Muslim information. If you're in America, you turn on the television, most often you're going to get a Christian disposition. That type of stuff, I think, would balance itself out. And as time moves forward, logic and reason can only prevail, especially when we begin to see the technological world around us. It always amazes me when I see full Muslims in headscarves and they have cell phones on. Even more amazing when you go to Saudi Arabia, not only do they have these full traditional garbs, underneath their garbs they have Gucci very often. They have really high-end things. You just like, how the compromises of religion are just going to keep occurring, and eventually they're going to keep shifting and reinterpreting their texts to slowly absorb what we're talking about, because what we're talking about is that efficient. So, at least that's my hope. That's the most likely path. Let me make sure I address your other points. If people want to build a bridge for a good reason, and another group doesn't want to because they like the environment as it is, well, there'd have to be more information to that, and there would have to be functional utility. Functional utility reigns in this type of structure. There's something to be said for scenic views, but if there's a necessity for something that requires a structural change. And as long as you take in the retroactive aspect, as long as you take in the consequence of what you're doing, and it is deemed acceptable and sustaining, then you do it. There could be a system of, quote, voting on some level if there are disagreements, of course. Consensus would be reached, but it would be reached based on reason. You wouldn't just have people say, I believe this, another person say, I believe and think this, and then it's a draw just because they disagree. Those types of disagreements will become less and less frequent because of the processes of thought that's implemented. I know that sounds very presumptuous when I say that, believe me, but that's the only way. And think about it. Who votes on bridges anyway? No one even thinks about stuff like that. So if you put it in a relative sense in the common day, some of the gripes that people email me in these questions, they kind of have a narrow disposition based on these theoreticals that I think most wouldn't even consider when the time moves forward. Anyway, number 17. Sorry if this was already covered, but I have a question about the carrying capacity of the Earth. If we have, say, 6 billion people on Earth, and we find that the carrying capacity is 3 billion, then what do we do? And even if we get the population down to 3 billion, then would people not be able to breed for a certain period of time and not go over the carrying capacity? I realize this is a totally hypothetical, but it's something I've been thinking about. Well, first of all, the carrying capacity of the Earth is, of course, finite in and of itself, but it's also based on development of technology and the intelligent management of the Earth's resources. So substitutions, once you have an efficient system that can understand the placement of resources, the usage in the most efficient way based on a systems approach, an entirely oriented, entirely holistic systems approach, the carrying capacity of the Earth, I think, could possibly increase in abstraction. And in the end, if we did exceed the carrying capacity of the Earth, there would only be one choice, and that's to move off the planet. And I think by the time I don't know what the carrying capacity of the Earth is. What I do know is that what we have now between energy and food alone is enough to supply the world's people 100 times over. It's based on the application, and that's really what it comes down to, the management. If you remove all of the waste and duplicity and duplication coming from industry right now, I think you would drop. In other words, if you focused on creating the best resources, you take into account Moore's law, you make sure things are updatable, they're made to be recycled, so we don't have this perpetual creation of garbage over and over and over again that end up in landfills just because a corporation wants to make money. I mean, we have dozens and dozens of cell phone companies. Why can't they all work together and put their minds together and make the most efficient cell phone that can be possible at that point in time? So these are the frames of reference. And I believe, I'm speaking gesturally, you cut production by 50%. You cut resource usage by 50% easily if you got the world to work together in that regard. So carrying capacity of the Earth, I couldn't tell you what it is because we don't have a full assessment of it, but I know it exceeds what we have now by far. And in the end, we'd move off the planet, and we would be able to foreshadow such a problem. And in the end, even more so, I keep saying in the end, I'll have to stop doing that, the people would begin to learn about their relationships to the Earth. They would be taught these issues in school. They would understand their relationship. You wouldn't have these institutions that tell you to be fruitful and multiply. That's really intelligent, that the Bible tells everyone just to be fruitful and multiply. Well, great. Who's going to take care of all of these people that are multiplying? You have to have a sense of realism. People that are against abortion have irrational dispositions holistically. I'm not saying that someone might not be uncomfortable with such an issue in and of themselves, but there's this bizarre connotation of human life that far exceeds any form of rationality as far as this, quote, freedom. It's not that you want to restrict people. You want people to understand what they're doing. If you only have a little bit of food between a number of people, you have to ration it and preserve it as best you can. That's the frame of reference that needs to go forward. People will understand. I think it will be common knowledge, the carrying capacity of the Earth to a certain degree. And people will not just flagrantly multiply as they do today based on religion and everything else. There's a reason people brought onto the planet should be created in the sense of purpose, not arbitrary. I know that sounds very mechanistic, but I'm going to stop there because I get too many people have crazy interpretations of thinking about human life in a technical sense. There's a spiritual aspect to human beings, but that is relative to each other. I'm nothing but upset when I see flagrant families produce tons and tons of children, and they're on welfare or on minimum wage. Don't they understand what they're doing? I mean, don't they see the statistical probability of a corrupt child emerging from a despotic scenario? So it's time we think a little bit more mechanically about human development and the programming that underscores human development and the value systems that are implanted based on the environment. Why is it that more poor people have the most kids and people that are well-to-do tend to have less? Why is that? Obviously, it's an educational issue. Anyway, number 18. In the circular city system, how would society deal with the dead? I ask because traditionally many cultures bury their dead because it is a matter of religious significance. The reason I ask is because, from what I understand, spirituality would still be involved in the new culture. So would people still want to honor their relatives and loved ones with monuments, etc., as per modern-day cemeteries? I think other means of honoring the dead, so to speak, would emerge. I have to admit, I find it horrifying. It is silly, superstitious thing that we bury people. People will live their whole lives in destitution, and then when they die, suddenly they're taken more care of than when they were alive. They get silk-lined coffins. We fill them full of chemicals, put them in the earth. The chemicals seep out of the coffins and pollute the water table. There's a ton of whatever the preservative they use in people. You find this in many water tables across the planet, and it's a complete waste of space. You know, there should be, it's such a testy subject because of the traditional aspect of it. In time, if you want to know where cemeteries really stand, you can rest assured that in time, after a few generations, they're all slowly dug up and they are recycled. The land is recycled and buildings are built. I mean, if you think about it, if you kept every cemetery from every dead person that ever existed, there would be no space on the planet, most likely, for anything. That's, of course, a hypothetical, but you see my point. So, I think a new form of value system would emerge, one that's a little bit more rational. Complex question. I won't be buried. I'll be cremated, that's for sure. I'm not going to pollute the environment. Number 19, becoming aware of Jacques Fresco, his work, life, and understanding has been the most enriching point in my life so far. Given he is already 93 years old, have there been any measures to ensure that his design work, ideas, etc., are preserved after his death? Roxanne Meadows is a walking encyclopedia of Jacques Fresco. She's been listening and working with Jacques for 30 years. And talking with Roxanne, it's amazing how much she's absorbed of Mr. Fresco, and she thoroughly understands it as well. If you see Jacques' interviews, you know that Roxanne's always there. And I'm just amazed to make a long story short, she knows exactly what Jacques is about, more so than anybody. So Jacques was actually asked that question, and Roxanne made a comment about that. She was very much prepared and knows what needs to be done. So, and there are always other people that are going to take this information and slowly absorb it and make different twists. And it's going to be an evolutionary process too. It isn't just Jacques Fresco. It's where all minds are coming together in this type of direction. Even if all of us are somehow taken out, I think this direction could easily move forward just based on the general logic of it. You'll notice that Fresco doesn't just talk about technicals, and he's not incomprehensible. What he's describing is very simplistic, in fact. It's just very natural. It doesn't require a lot of extreme technical understanding to know where he's coming from. It's actually just completely logical and simplistic. He's a great communicator in that way, too. Number 20, Peter, will you please emphasize that we are proposing a system without rulers, government, authority, laws, enforcement, etc.? I know you have mentioned this already, but please elaborate. I come to this movement from the perspective of a volunteerist, meaning that all actions between individuals are done so on a volunteer consensual basis. Excuse me. I know in my mind that the Zeitgeist Movement and resource-based economy is compatible with this social philosophy, but others may not have yet had the chance to realize this. So please elaborate on the fact that no one will be coerced into the society we're proposing, that absolute freedom is the objective. It is for some reason some people didn't want to, if for some reason some people did not want to be a part of it, they would be free to live elsewhere how they want to write. Yes, Josh talked about that as well, going in reverse of your point and question. If people do not want to be a part of the society, just like you have the Amish today, those attributes, space is still there. It's not a rigid all-or-nothing system. But the benefits of the society, I think, would be so grand that people would eventually, in time, want to be a part of the community. As far as your issue on rulers, government, authority, laws, enforcement, and how the system we propose has none of these, yes, that is, of course, after a long period of transition. We have to be a little more, we have to be realistic. Obviously, it's the focus that we want to reverse, as I mentioned earlier. Laws, for example. We have to have laws in the transition. There's too much bad energy out there from what our system has created. Laws, well, the focus is to remove as many laws as possible by taking care of the root causes of human behavior. In other words, finding out why people do the way they do and eliminating those causes. You know, when a kid steals a bicycle and goes to prison for say a kid, let's say he steals a car, that's a little bit more reasonable. A guy steals a car and he goes to jail for 5 years. The cost of the jail is probably about $20,000 to $30,000 a year. So, $150,000 to keep a person incarcerated to steal a car that maybe costs $6,000. There's a logical flaw there. Why not just give him the car and be done with it? Generally speaking, that's the frame of reference we need to have. You make things available to people, and they'll be less inclined to be corrupt because there's no depravity. But laws are going to have to exist in the more complex forms. As we move forward, they will be diminished. But say jealousy, crimes of passion, rape and murder that are not related to deprivation in the direct sense, material deprivation, those are psychological neuroses, and they come from somewhere. They're not people that are just outright bored. There are genetic propensities that can compound tendencies like that. Don't get me wrong. That is very true. But you want to design society not where those propensities don't come to culmination. So in the event someone goes out and, say, finds his or her partner with somebody else and they lose it and they end up killing somebody or injuring somebody violently, they would need to be taken in and assessed in some form, not just locked into a concrete cell, not given the free will nonsense of the court system today where they're just punished outright. It becomes more complex than that. So authority, enforcement, government, all of these things we want to move outside of as fast as possible. Is it just a one fell swoop? No, not necessarily. And I think that's important to realize. But the pattern is reversed of what we see today. Right now, governments make more and more laws. We want to reverse that process. We want to find out how to reduce laws. So I hope that helps. And let me see about your other points. Please elaborate on the fact that no one will be coerced into the society we're proposing. Yeah, well, no one's coerced, but the benefits, I think, will be so profound that it would only become reasonable for someone to want to participate in the society. Again, those are complex questions. You guys are hitting me with a lot of complex questions today that have lots of gray areas. I think if you were to present this information to people, you don't just say, well, we want no laws and no government, no police, no enforcement, because that's not enough information for people to understand in today's world. You want to find the root causes of behavioral malformations, and you want to assess those, and you want to redesign the structure so those attributes are not as non-existent as possible. And I think through evolution, through time, a new value system will emerge, will be constructed, essentially, that's relevant, a relevant value system that's based on the preservation of the preservation of resources, the reciprocation of human beings' behavior. In other words, people will see each other as themselves because there really is no other way. The interconnection, symbiosis of things, all of these things become abundantly clear once you step far enough back. But in our system today, we're absolutely blinded, and it's going to be tough. Number 21. You often say that there are no us and them because we are products of our environment. Well, hold on, let me stop you right there. The us and them aspect has nothing to do per se with being products of the environment exactly. it has to do with the fact that the notion of us and them is static. And the issue is that the stasis of it is the point I'm trying to make. And I use that in a term that's specifically targeted to those that want to just constantly blame somebody else for their problems. It is in part because we're products of our environment, but everyone supports the system. Somebody who makes ammunitions for the war industry needs to feed his family. He does what he has to do so. But they might use his munitions to kill an innocent tribe somewhere in the Middle East. Is he responsible for that? Is he the them? This individual might not even like war. He might not even like that particular war, but he's still a part of it. And that's essentially what I'm talking about. We all continue to reinforce the system because, unfortunately, that's how we all achieve the reward of survival, is reinforcement of this monetary-based social concoction. But let me continue. I'm sorry. While this might be true in the future where we are not only equals but treated as equals as well, but for now, almost everything is us and them, all of them in powerful position-making, awful, despisable decisions. I'm sorry, English must not be the first language. Let me paraphrase this. Hold on a moment. Okay, the question is essentially, how do we deal with those that are in positions of power now that want to interfere with what we're doing or do not share the view that we do? Well, okay, in that sense, there is an us and them. Yes, you're right. In abstraction, the establishment is going to have to be challenged, and I think we've talked about that quite a few times. I don't believe they're going to give up the monetary system, and I think Fresco's made that point as well. There's really only two paths. There are others, but for the sake of this question, you challenge and you reject the system, and this could materialize in the form of mass protests on a global scale, and or the system collapses on its own accord. Most likely it's going to be a combination of the two. The question to me isn't, is this going to happen? The question is, how much suffering is going to have to occur in society before we finally realize the real correct path? That's the issue to me. I think that the groups in power that will fight this will slowly lose steam because they're going to start to be injured as well. And technological unemployment is, in fact, one of the most important attributes. And it's not just the phenomenon of it, it's the ramification of technology. I think that we could still trickle along for quite a bit of time with just a very slow increase in unemployment because most people don't realize what type of technology is actually out there. And this will be in the third film as well. If you actually step back and look at the technology, and then you simply creatively apply what you understand about the properties of that technology, the capabilities, to occupations that are in existence, you can see how virtually overnight, I would say 50% of most occupations could be removed. Not to mention occupations that have no basis to any type of, that have no social relevance whatsoever, and there are countless ones of those, as has been discussed before. So a little bit of a tangent on your point, but obviously, we all know that there is an establishment that is in absolute opposition to anything like this. We have a culture of, quote, them that has a value distortion that's based entirely upon self-interest, greed, and just narrow self-preservation. And that has to be overcome holistically. Again, it is a complex point, but we're going to get a lot of help from the awareness that technology can produce an abundance and can remove human beings of monotonous labor. Once most people realize that the 9-to-5s they go into are A, pointless, or B, can be replaced by machine, I think you'll see a consciousness shift. People will have a new level of understanding. They'll be given more tools, and their reasoning processes will allow them to understand that they're being had to a certain degree, that the system needs to be changed for the betterment of them. It always comes back to the self-preservation in a sense. Because I'm on this tangent, let me say one final point. The real value shift is not just a form of, holistic altruism. The real value shift is redefining self-interest. Instead of narrow self-interest, instead of unenlightened narrow self-interest, meaning self-interest for the individual, capitalistic, free market, monetary reward, me first, competing against the world. Instead of that, the new value system, the new form of self-interest will be the betterment of society as a whole. Because once the society is intertwined, once the society is cooperative, people will contribute to society because it's in their best interest to do so. So if someone has a great idea, they have to put it into the system for everyone to share in order for them to reap the benefits of it. That is what we mean by creating a system that is holistically designed as a social system, holistically designed to be social in the sense of the betterment of society itself. I'm sorry, I'm not making myself very clear, but I hope that point came across. That is really the card trick, so to speak. Once people are put in a position to see that their self-betterment, that their self-interest is maximized with the maximization of the interest of the betterment of society as a whole, that is where the value shift is really going to take speed. And that, again, will be a big point in the third film with much more detail. Okay, where am I? Number 22. In order to turn our greatest ideas into reality, we will need great organizational skills and tools, and I have noticed that one of the primary purposes of money is not to only motivate people, but also help organize them in a specific direction. I wouldn't agree with that, but let me continue. Assuming this is true, what will be the tool utilized to keep our resource-based economy focused and disciplined enough to stay organized? Well, this goes back to my prior point, but let me finish. Is there a key to unlocking human beings' natural ability to organize on a mass scale without money? Yes. And that's exactly what my prior point was. The incentive is the holistic well-being of society as a whole. If we don't take care of everyone, you're not safe. No one is. And what the world around you is essentially the result that you see. And it's only going to get more and more chaotic. Terrorism, true terrorism, is the outgrowth of depravity. The FARC in Colombia, I believe, they started out. They deal drugs. They have weapons. They started out as a form of protection against industry, as a form of protection against corrupt governments that were coming in and messing up their land and their work. Terrorism is a natural consequence, and I'm not talking about the nonsensical terrorism that is brought up. I'm talking about people that have become so desperate that they have to be led to these paths. And why is it that you never really heard about terrorism in the past? Well, in other words, why is it that if you look back in history, these types of notions don't seem as apparent? And that's because the system has gotten that much worse, as far as I'm concerned. People say that we've reached an age of, abundance already and all of these things. Well, in theory, perhaps. But the detachment of humanity has grown holistically. The severe gap between the rich and poor is growing right now, even in America. Across the world, it's incredible. And that's only going to create conflict, and that's only going to create war. So even the wealthiest person in the world is still susceptible to that bomb dropping on their head, from some rogue nation that's sick of it all. And therefore, it doesn't matter how secure they think they are with their fortune. They are still in the line of fire, just like all of us are. I hope that point becomes clear. As far as helping keep things organized, actually I think I answered that question. I'm not going very quickly here, so I want to keep moving on. Let me go back to that. I'm sorry. Is there a key to unlocking human beings' natural ability to organize on a mass scale without money? Yes. And that's the point I just made. Okay. Number 23. Question. Does the Zeitgeist Movement currently have resources vested in contacting people of influence? I'm asking because I'm asking people to contact those who have influenced them and possibly just say, hey, as a fan, I think this is a great direction, crucial information, we need your help, unquote. I couldn't agree with you more. I would love to see more people come forward that have celebrity status or have even, somewhat political status, anything that would get the information to the forefront, by all means. I mean, is there resources vested in it? On our projects page, we have some media contacts and things like that. I was a large campaign to get in touch with Michael Moore about certain issues, and based on his film, I have a feeling that he absorbed a little bit of it, and I could be wrong, I don't know. But nevertheless, we're doing everything that we can. If anybody to contact anybody in the highest echelon, in the higher echelons in media that can get this information to a larger audience, by all means, please do so. And Are there resources vested? That's up to you. I do what I can. I certainly try to contact when I meet anybody that's of any prestige. I present this information. Unfortunately, it's still a very, very, very radical notion. A lot of people get angry with the associations that I've made and with religion and 9/11, but I want to point out something that when you start talking about the capitalist system and the removal of the monetary system, of all things, it throws those controversial notions out the window. This is so radical that most people really are terrified of the idea. They can't even consider the possibility, and that's the tendency that is still dominant right now. It's going to take a lot more work, but believe me, I'm doing whatever I can. Number 24, perhaps the biggest issue people have with the resource-based economy is how to get to it. How can we transition to this type of system? This is, of course, a very common question, which I've answered numerous times. Let me say that there are essentially two general paths, and again, I'm going to make these very apparent in the new film. The first model has to do with the actual government and corporate compliance, If the Obama administration really cared about what's happening with unemployment, they would, well, there's a lot of things that they would have done, but nevertheless, they would start taking control of industry, and they would divide up the workday. They would keep the salaries the same. So someone that works 8 hours would now only work 4, but they'd be paid the same amount of money. Then they would bring in somebody else to fill in that other gap. Now, why doesn't that happen? Well, there's one big contrasting problem. It would be against the free market if the government intervened. Ooh. So you can't expect, they already destroyed the only possibility, well, excuse me, I don't mean to sound extreme. We're not going to get any socialized health care in America, and the lobby of the pharmaceutical industry and the medical establishment is far too powerful. They can just crush Congress. No one has any courage to move forward with any type of really social aspect that would really satisfy the American culture. So, are they going to do that? Obviously not. But I'm going to talk about that. There could be lobbies to do such, to say, look, we have to start dividing these occupations so more people can be employed. That's what they intended to attempt to do. The unions in the 1930s would have long meetings about this. In fact, even Roosevelt had made comments about this. So that's one path, and it seems logical. It seems like that society would care enough, but we're too sick. Industry's far too sick. And, what company is going to want to do that? Because, again, they lose their differential advantage. The more destitute society is, the less these corporations have to pay for employment. And there's just a vast spectrum of examples like that go completely against the competitive mechanism of the capitalist free market system. So I find it to be very difficult. So that's the first path, is a rational, step-by-step unfolding, a movement into the slow eradication of government and industry, employment being multiplied. Anyway, you get the point. The second path has to do with the rejection of the system, a capitalization on its failure, for lack of no pun intended, and basically eventually protests will have to come forward and we'll have to force the establishment to do it. And I think that because of the inherent nature of the establishment to maintain this system, because of the reward mechanisms for the few, for the upper 10%, that they will not have an incentive to back down, and things are just going to get worse and worse and worse with unemployment, with food scarcity, water scarcity, environmental pollution, until you're going to reach a very, very chaotic point, probably more chaotic than anything we've ever seen. I'm not talking World War. I'm talking something much more specific than that. I'm talking about grand amounts of poverty and destitution. We're already running out of water, clean water, in various places in Africa. This is just nuts. Desalinization plants could be put anywhere. And there's many forms of desalinization plants. They don't have to be complex structures. Anyway, I don't want to go into all of that. The transition is going to be a combination of biosocial pressures and human ingenuity to want to move forward. Number 25. My question, would you support a free market economy as a means to acquire the technology necessary to establish an economy of abundance, the convincing point that needs to be made is that if we had a free market, the necessities of life would eventually come at an extreme low cost, so everyone could afford to acquire their basic needs. People could become more free to allocate resources more efficiently, and in time provide the necessities of life to all at little to no cost to the individual. Well, I admire your assumption, but no, that's not going to happen in a free market economy. If, as I mentioned, if there was a transition point, which is essentially what you're implying, then by all means. But the very construct of the free market capitalist structure is against that notion. And it would take the regulation by a larger order institution, i.e. government, to do so, and that wouldn't be free market. And you can't trust the government to do it either in a monetary system because they are subject to the same type of influence and legislative lobbying. So, I would say, yes, I agree with you, but I don't see that as a legitimate path. I wish that was the case. I mean, obviously, there's lots of technological progress happening even in our current system. There is in the Western world a lot of luxury aspects. We don't have to worry about food in the Western world anymore. But that's only one side of the planet. We have equally as much destitution in the world as we do affluence. Well, excuse me, that's not the correct statement. Basic affluence, general Western middle class affluence, not true affluence of the upper 1%. So I agree with you. I would like to see something like that, by all means. The question to you is, do you think that's ever going to happen? Number 26. Mr. Joseph, I was wondering why Z-Day is on March 15th. Why that date? March 15th is after the second full moon, after the dawn of Osiris's birth as dictated. Never mind. There's no date relevance to that whatsoever. I do always appreciate how people love to attach meaning to just about anything. It's like just anything. People want to find some meaning for it. We have this bizarre, strange neuroses in this culture to try and define meaning to everything. In my personal opinion, we project meaning, and that's all meaning really is. Meaning is an invention that we've come up with. No, absolutely no meaning to the March 15th date other than the fact that I'd like to have Zeitgeist around that date. In fact, next year, most likely it will be the weekend before the 15th because I believe the 15th falls on a Monday, and that's kind of inconvenient. Number 27, you mentioned, as you have before, that corruption and power-hungry citizens can't be a problem in the new system because there will be no point to that type of behavior, that without monetary gain there will be no reward and therefore no motivation for that behavior. But it made me wonder about all the corrupt people in the current system that are so incredibly wealthy that money no longer matters to them. Someone with billions of dollars has no real need for money, and yet they are still corrupt. They don't just drop out of the corruption and enjoy their life of plenty. They continue. Okay, I see your point. That's a very interesting point. Well, first of all, those that have exorbitant amounts of money, most of them, they have moved through a particular process to attain that type of wealth, and that typically comes in vast manifolds of general free market corruption, general competitive differential advantage. So once you go through that whole value system, that whole conditioning process, why would you just change at that point? If you've been a criminal to get rich, once you're rich, that doesn't mean you just suddenly don't have a, quote, criminal mentality. Corruption, money is a polluting mechanism. Even if you inherited a lot of money, there's a high propensity, I think, for you to be very stingy and corrupt. For someone to even have $40 billion is inherently corrupt because that's actually food being held and restricted from other people. They don't need that type of money. There's no basis for that type of necessity other than, irrational exuberance and this nonsensical fantasy we have of assuming that, there's just this infinite capacity of everything, and that's basically the drive that most people seem to have when they think about the free market. They think, well, one day I might be able to have $40 billion. Sadly, it doesn't work that way. It's impossible, in fact, for it to work that way. But I'm off the point here. So the reason that people are corrupt in the higher echelons is because they've been conditioned into that type of behavior. Now, I have to see more specifics of what you're talking about. It depends on how you define the term corruption as well. It's not that when people have everything, suddenly they become non-corrupt. That's a little bit different because the value system is still implemented in society, and they still mirror society with their value system. somebody born into a society, a different society, that isn't based on extremity, isn't based on wealth as a status symbol, is based upon people getting the resources that they need to live, and they live in a way that isn't materialistic in the sense that we see today, because materialism compounds our way of life. Our values have been highly altered to be as materialistic as possible. Why? Because that's how you keep the economy going. If people were not materialistic, then the economy would have a big problem. I think I've mentioned this before, but before the Second World War, the consumption level on average per capita was half of what it is now. And why? Social scientists got together after World War II, and so we have to get people to start consuming. And that's really the pattern that you see today, this perpetual consumption, perpetual emptiness of people wanting more and more and more. How much is enough? It's never, ever going to be enough. And that's the neuroses. So even with somebody with $40 billion is very likely going to still have that frame of mind. Why is it that people with lots of money tend to be miserly and they don't give hardly anything? People commend a lot of rich people out there. They see dollar signs of donations to different charities. Somebody will donate, $1 million, $2 million, even maybe $50 million to something. But if you put it in perspective to their net worth, it's just change. So the relative aspect needs to be taken into account when you value someone's contribution, a wealthy individual's contribution to society. Anyway, I'm on a series of tangents there. But the point being is that the system will compound this type of element regardless of how much money you have. Instead, you want to value a system not based on materialistic self-interest. You want to value a system based on functional utility and necessity. And again, if there's not there are many forms of corruption, but monetary corruption is the most pertinent. So just taking that into account, it should suffice to see that removal of the monetary system, to remove that reinforcement for such mechanisms, is the most progressive step that we could take. Number 28, does the Zeitgeist Movement have an organized collection of people dedicated to creating school resources? This was part of a much longer question regarding programs that have third-party educational resources that can be downloaded for different teachers. And to the person that wrote that question, I think that's a great idea. I've never actually considered that angle, but it's something to think about. Jacques has talked about making an orientation program, literally a series of articles or a series of videos as an educational step-by-step process to think about what we talk about, both from the mechanics of a resource-based economy to the value systems. It really just comes down to what curriculum that would fall into in the school. But I think that's a great idea. I'll give that more thought. Number 30, by now we all understand the premises that we need. We need clean air, healthy food, clean water, a sane, sustainable society, technological liberation, and an interconnected perspective of ourselves and our planet. We also understand that spreading the message is the priority of this stage. Now, Peter, why do you think members are waiting on you to provide some sort of agenda when they understand these premises and can further communicate and refine these understandings by personally seeking out individuals? Well, I think there's a natural propensity, to seek out some form of leadership. In certain contexts, of course, it's required. There has to be organizational people, and that's exactly what I'm trying to do, and appoint people in different chapters to help with organizational aspects. I obviously want people to understand the information and absorb it and become it, and to be able to walk around in their day-to-day lives and communicate these points without the need to reference somebody else arbitrarily as far as direction. I'm doing my best to give as much direction as I can. I certainly can do a lot more, and I will in the future. But as you point out, people do need to take it upon themselves. People email me and they want to do lecture things, and I have downloadable materials. If you feel confident enough to give a lecture, you don't need approval from me to do it, or Jacques. Just do it and get good at it and practice it and start talking, and that's the way people need to begin to think about it. I want it to be holographic in the sense that there's so many educated people that are involved in the movement that really no one has to look to anybody for direction anymore, except for maybe a conglomerate of information that's output that continues to support the movement. So To answer the question simplistically, it's a combination of the two. I'm happy people are coming back to sort of a home base with Fresco, and as I do, and to refresh these notions, but all people also have to be confident and have the will to move forward on their own. I obviously can't sit there and talk to everybody. I mean, I get tons and tons of emails with all sorts of crazy specific questions. And some questions, if anybody out there, by the way, wants to show the films, just do it. Don't email me. You don't have to get approval from me. Even if you have to rent a theater and charge for it, go ahead. It doesn't matter to me. That's understandable. Things like that. There's a lot of questions I get which really don't need to be asked. And anyway. But thank you for that point, and I think everyone should consider that. Number 31. I always welcome seemingly inflammatory statements of yours as opportunities to reevaluate my belief system. It is with this composure that I tried to assess the last answer in last week's address, where you say you want to see more suffering caused by unemployment because it is necessary. Let me continue. My question is, what happened to there being no doubt that we could have a peaceful transition? Emotion may be imperative to change, but do we have to rely on suffering? Though we can capitalize on inevitable suffering, wishing for it seems distasteful when we can instead focus on the positive emotions attributed to the educational, social theory we have to offer. There are enough negative catalysts out there without us having to be pro-unemployment. Please elaborate. Well, first of all, I apologize if I came off as coarse in that statement. I don't remember exactly what I said. I probably said something to the effect that I want to see more technological unemployment. I want to see, a certain degree of suffering as a catalytic thing, and I mean that in abstraction. There has to be a biosocial pressure for this move to occur. It's not going to happen fluidly. And I don't want to see people get hurt, but in abstraction, there has to be, there's unfortunately going to be a good deal of displacement, of people that are more and more deprived because of what this system does. It's not my fault. I certainly don't wish for it, but it is a logical assumption that I'm very much aware of. And I have, there's other programs I have thought of to try and help people with this type of problem. For example, I was thinking about starting a Z-Bank, a time bank for the Zeitgeist Movement. Well, one of these is in New York. I have a good friend who does stuff with that, and what that would be essentially is a barter system. Of course, the IRS wouldn't like it, but it's very difficult for them to do anything about it. A barter system based on services where no money is exchanged at all, and it's growing in New York. There is a time bank New York. Again, I've been in touch with somebody that works in there, and I just haven't had time to move forward with it. I would love to have solutions to people that are out of the job, but I also want to see the impression be made outright and not covered over and not sugar-coated. Displacement will occur. Suffering will occur. Of course, I don't like that. Back to your other point, what happened to there being no doubt that we could have a peaceful transition? I'm not quite sure what you mean by the term peaceful transition. I'm not advocating war or anything like that. The peaceful transition, I think you meant to say a smooth transition or a hopeful transition where there's not that much suffering. Well, I really hope that as well. In fact, that's why the movement kind of is what it is, I think. We're attempting to allow that to occur. But the biosocial pressures is what really creates change. And what I mean by that is people have to get a little bit injured, unfortunately, for them to feel the need to change. Your general conditioned individual, middle class, who has a job, who does fine, is probably not going to pay any attention to the Zeitgeist Movement or any type of social change because they're doing okay. It comes from a form of collapse, and Jacques talked about this many, many times. In fact, that's the majority of what he talks about. It's the progression is not necessarily going to be, quote, voluntary in some easy evolutionary path. I wish it could be, but there's no evidence to support that can be the case. I know that's difficult to think about, but the more you focus on this information and the more you talk about it, the faster and the more ease that will be inserted in the system, the more expectations will shift. If people have somewhere to go, they're less likely to sit dormantly and not do anything. Most people out there have no idea of any other options to the monetary system. Therefore, when they become unemployed, they don't know what to do. They don't see another option. They have nowhere to move. Those that do become unemployed and do understand this direction will be more motivated to move forward in this direction. So back to my original point, back to your concern, I don't want to see suffering, but there has to be something to trigger people's awareness. And based on general human conditioning and the processes of human thought, the general kind of human mentality and how how change has worked historically, there has to be some type of push, and that push is going to have to be that push will likely inevitably be somewhat negative and hence catalytic. So I wish I could say something more positive on that, but that is the reality as I see it. Number 32, I have listened much to the radio address, and I hear you use the phrase systems approach to society a lot. I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit on what you mean by that. I know how we would govern ourselves with the help of the scientific method, but I don't understand the phrase. A systems approach is a unified approach to whatever accomplishment, whatever output you're seeking. So in the Venus Project, in a resource-based economy, a systems approach would be a holistic approach to just about every facet, meaning that it's completely and utterly interconnected. It's unified. Instead of having a bunch of competing companies making the same products with slight enhancements as they compete, often in collusion, creating cartels and monopolies whenever they can, there would be another system of production, a new system where everyone works together holistically, using technology and innovation to make the best of the best constantly and improving in a very consistent manner and updating and foreseeing all of these things. No differential advantage, no reason to shortchange the public or to one-up another per se with strange nuances of culture, which is what you tend to see today. As far as agriculture would be completely tied in holistically within a city system. And idealistically, after the city system is understood, all the information that's created, all the information that is compounded by the systems approach in that city system would be relayed to all city systems on the planet as well. So there would be, idealistically, a holistic system of the entire planet working in a systems approach. It is that's basically it. Central computerized database is the way we organize it, and we've talked about this. Sensor systems all around the globe. Not only does, say, a city in the Midwest of America have awareness of what's happening in their environment, they also have an absolute holistic scientific awareness of what's happening all across the world. So if they realize they need a resource for anything, say they have a distribution project that's underway and they run out of resources in a specific region, they can go into this system and they can see where the other where the other resources are anywhere on the planet, and they can engage the system to get those resources to them in the most efficient and timely means possible. That's what a systems approach is. I'm trying to think of a general example that's a little bit more concise that you see. Basically, any form of monitoring and regulation that's done automatically, sort of like how the human body works, the human nervous system. That's an analogy Jacques Fresco often uses. A systems approach is essentially like having a nervous system. So if there's a problem in your body and you cut yourself, well, there's no democracy. There's no people talking about, do we choose to fix this element of the skin? It just happens. And that's a big point. So I hope that clarifies that. I can think of other examples, but I want to move forward. I'm slowly running out of time here. Number 33, in the radio address and interview materials with Jacques, I have heard the phrase functional utility being used as a descriptor for a prioritization of resources. It would seem to me that this can be a relative scale of importance based on individuals and or cultures. For example, a dental implant is a screw implanted into the jaw surgically, which a crown or other appliance is permanently affixed. This is, of course, to replace both the tooth that has been lost as a result of an accident or oral disease. Dispelling the vanity aspect of the desire to have a perfect smile, it could be stated that this particular device is equally relevant and irrelevant. Relevant in the restoration of normal function, irrelevant in the respect that one has, I would hope, other teeth to chew with. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, but let me continue. I find that this aspect of the movement is one that causes an immediate and adverse reaction in those I have communicated with. The normal paraphrase being, well, what good is a system if some software decides what I can and cannot have, and haven't you just substituted a money class with a techno class with equal opportunity to corrupt and abuse the system to their advantage. While I can appreciate the stance that there would be no functional reward per se for such manipulation, convincing others that the neuroses for power over others would somehow become irrelevant is a difficult proposition. Would appreciate your insight on this issue. There's actually a few issues that you raised. Let me go back here. Okay, the functional utility aspect is just that. As far as the nature of the smile and, the teeth, the functional utility of teeth is to chew with. I think I understand your point. The vanity aspect of teeth is a different realm. There's other examples you could probably think of. For example, if someone, as one I thought of actually yesterday, if someone worked out a lot, and say, there's a vanity aspect for men to want to work out and get very buff, as they call it, and say someone can lift 300 pounds. Are they laborers? Do they have a reason for having that type of bulk? I mean, does it serve a function for someone to have extreme bulk and have that type of ability to lift such weight? I mean, is there a utility for it, or is it vanity? Is it for health reasons? Well, I think after a certain point of any kind of working out in that regard, you probably end up hurting your joints, so I think it could be contrary to health. Granted, being fit is good, but there's always that gray area, and the gray area is essentially what you talk about. I would say there's no point in someone being able to lift hundreds and hundreds of pounds and being absolutely buff unless they have a purpose for that type of strength. But then again, there's a massive vanity aspect with that as well. And there could be a health aspect too. So, the issue has to do with each case. And that's pretty much all I can say on that. And it isn't that there's some type of overwhelming orientation of people and what they do, there isn't some type of overbearing element. Let me just think about the best way to say this. The first priority of the culture is to take care of what is actually utility, what the utility requires. In other words, you can't worry about the vanity aspects initially. Once the systems aspects are taken care of, once the functional utility, once everything that requires acknowledgement, such as the production of food and everything else, is taken care of, then you can move on to non-utility-based ideals. And that's basically it. And basically, your other point, and I've talked about that a lot, actually, and I think I've explained it a lot better before. It's funny, every time I get these questions, I try to explain it a different way. Sometimes I just can't do it. I think I made that clear. I'm not going to continue to harp on that. As far as your point that you find, normal paraphrase is, well, what's good for the system is the software decides what I can and cannot have, and haven't you just substitute the money class for the techno class? Oh, that's really bizarre. No, the software doesn't just decide everything for everybody. There is a system of priority, but that's based, again, on what is required to maintain the basic structure of society. The people have lots of choices, and then, as I mentioned before, you interact with the system and you can create individual products, so to speak, for your own usage as time moves forward with advanced malleable robotics. The function, though, is the value issue. I've already made this point before with earrings and things like that. Let me just finish this question. There's no substitute of a money class or the techno class because there's no class. Everyone's equally participating or participating at whatever level that they want to, holistically, and there's no reward for the form of corruption that you typically see today. Is it perfect? No, this isn't a utopia. There might be problems. In fact, there's always going to be problems. But it's just a lot better than what we have today. Manipulation for a reward, well, what is the functional reward? I mean, how can someone obtain power over someone else in the structure when it's a holistic systems approach and the fundamentals of society are taken care of by simple technical automated systems based on distribution of resources and everything else? The two most corruption-producing aspects in our current culture are money and resources. Resources, of course, relating to money. This is taken care of in the new system through, again, the intelligent management of the Earth's resources. So I hope that helps. Getting kind of a little tired if you can't hear it, but I'm going to keep moving forward. Number 34, I wonder if it will be possible for one single country to start a resource-based economy without the whole world doing it at the same time, or if we will be able to wait until doomsday when all countries will do it at the same time. If it could be possible for one country to start it off, how would that country go about doing it, implementing it? I think one country could start the initial trend, sure. And this is what we've talked about before with the test city, the theme city, a place where other countries come to visit. This could be done in Latin America. However, if the movement if it turns into a communal type of thing where it's an isolated system, you're only going to have problems because there'll be deprivation on the outside, and people will want to come in time. I mean, it has to move into a global system. It has to spread. Otherwise, it's just a commune, and it'll be subject to all sorts of problems. Not to mention, you won't have the resource freedom that you would in the resource-based economy if we are in a hybrid system. Granted, I think a hybrid system will likely occur in a transition, but as long as there's a monetary system on the outside, you're going to have to be paying for those resources from somebody. You can only harness the resources you have in your specific area. So I hope that's fairly clear as far as the technical aspect. I know we're not waiting until doomsday when all countries will do it at the same time. That's probably not going to happen, but it would be great to see a few countries come on board. Again, this is too far down the line for me to give any legitimate opinion on. If it could be possible for one country to start off, how would the country go about it and implementing it? They would build the first test city, as we've talked about before. Number 35, is it correct to say that as of now, the Western country's economy and lifestyle is directly, or at least very, dependent on the war, enslavement, and exploitation of less developed countries? If so, it would be a good way to get people thinking about the effects of their lifestyle and what they value in their life. Yes, absolutely. I think John Perkins has done the best job of talking about the WTO, World Bank, and IMF. His second book, I believe, Secret History of the American Empire, if I remember correctly. I can't remember the exact title, but anyway, it goes into extreme detail about more corruptions that exist within the corporate establishment. And yes, we abuse the third world. War, of course, is a mechanism for many things. I mean, what's happening in Iraq right now? They're going to give I think a $9 or $10 billion loan to Iraq to the IMF. I mean, what does that even mean? What is the IMF? It's just anyway. The exploitation of underdeveloped countries is how the Western world essentially survives. That's why our standard of living is what it is, in part. And as far as your second point, yes, people should think about their use of sweatshop materials. They should think about their use of buying things that are created. They should do whatever they can to not feed that system, but I know how difficult it is. People are demographically oriented, meaning if you only have X amount of money and you can only go to Walmart to buy things, I'm not going to come down on you because you have no other option. It is, in fact, much more expensive to buy things that are made in a legitimate fashion, meaning things that aren't based on, absolute exploitation like slave labor, in Jamaica or something like that. I know how difficult it is, but by all means, I think people should always give thought to what they buy and really try their best not to support the system. Hello, Peter. I want your opinion about my idea about making a video game out of the Venus Project called Sims Venus Project. Sure. I'm not sure how you would go about that. I know other people have talked about Second Life and making a virtual environment in Second Life. Anything like that would be unique. I'd be curious to know what your intent is as far as what the mechanics of the game would be. But by all means, that would be fascinating. Maybe that's something that could be part of the Zeitgeist Media Project, which should be up soon. Number 37, is this movement in any way related to humanism? I see many humanist goals reflected in this movement, and I was wondering if the humanist label is a good one for this movement when people ask about our religious affiliation. No. Any singular word is divisionary. I don't subscribe to any singular word, such as humanist or liberal. All of those have retroactive connotations, and I don't like any of them. It's better to describe what you are. I certainly wouldn't claim it as a religious affiliation. I don't recognize the word religion either. It's an empty word. So the interpretation of humanism, no. I don't subscribe to that whatsoever. While there might be shared attributes, I wouldn't degrade yourself by giving yourself some silly name like, oh, I'm a humanist. Number 38, I was wondering if you, Jacques, or Roxanne had some recommendations about what to read if I want to learn more about future medical possibilities and how we can use technology to improve or help us as a species. That's an interesting question. I'm going to have to save that for Jacques when he comes on. That's a little bit beyond anything that I'm that aware of. I know there's been some great speculation on medical possibilities from nanotechnology, biotech, of course, engineering. It's a very controversial topic, but I think once we begin to master the very mechanics of cell creation and cell multiplication and the machines that govern the internals of our body, where we can, say, inject a series of nanobots into your skin, and they can go after, say, a cancer cell, and they can know exactly where to go, almost like having little intelligent machines, which is essentially what they are, in you, and they can take care of whatever problem you might have. Maybe even regeneration of limbs could be possible with that type of technology. I don't know, but there's a lot of fantastic things that could be possible. It's just too bad the medical cartels in power are what they are. Number 39, I saw a clip on YouTube stating that the Venus Project is moving to Ecuador. Is this the case? And could you spend a moment filling us in on what the plan in Ecuador is? You know what? I haven't heard them talk about that in quite a while. When I first met Jacques and Roxanne, they were selling their place and moving. They were planning to move to Ecuador. And then as they got more popular, I think they really thought the issue. I don't think they have any property in Ecuador anymore. I'm not sure if that's the case anymore. I don't think so. In fact, I haven't brought that up to them in a long, long time. I don't think that's the case, though. I know that they need to sell their space, their property, because they simply can't afford the upkeep on it, and that's basically the rationale for that. Regardless of where they go, the Venus Project is still very much alive. Their current research facility, they usually just give tours more than anything else at this stage. I mean, there's obviously work being done, but it isn't the research facility that I think many might assume it is. But regardless of where the Venus Project goes, it really doesn't matter. The ideas are what's important. Number 40, this question deals with the first section of your first film. While I completely agree with everything you say, heavily indoctrinated Christians do not. Thus, when you add it all up, there's a high probability that the figure named Jesus didn't exist. Oh, let me read this really quickly because I'm running out of time. It's very long. All right. Basically, he's talking about being nicer to the religious community on the first film and maybe changing something in the first film. One way or another, you're going to make people upset. It all depends on what degree of upset. I've met people that were Christian that loved the first part of the film. It reinforced their faith, believe it or not. I've met people that are absolutely atheists now because of seeing the first film. And of course, I've met people that believe it's all made up and there's no relevance to it, and it's just infuriating and insulting. There's two angles to religion. You can have the superstitious basis, or you can have the value system basis. I reject the superstitious basis. If you believe that some man lived 2,000 years ago and died for your sins, quote, that's a serious form of neuroses, and I'm not afraid to tell anybody that. Why? Because it has absolutely no form of feedback in the environment. What does it even mean to die for someone's sins? If that was the case, that means that everyone here is free. We should just be slaughtering everybody around us, and we'll all go to heaven, right? So, I get tired of people's perpetual complaints about my apparent lack of strategy when I talk about religion. I hate to say it, but this has to be addressed. And I do my best. And there are plenty of Christians I talk to that are very open to this, and they accept the notions. They don't necessarily agree with all the things that are stated. But, it doesn't matter if Jesus existed. It matters what his character's points are what matter. They speak to the human condition, at least some of the points. That is the beauty of, that's what religion should be. It's a matter of value orientation in a positive sense, in a reciprocated sense, in a highly egalitarian sense. And that's beautiful. And I recognize any and all religions for that tendency. But when it comes to the superstitious aspect, I'm not going to quiet my lip on this, because there's no way we're going to see progress in society if we don't address the problems of thought and the mental derangements that people unfortunately have in this culture. It's like being around a bunch of, a bunch of very aberrated people, I don't know, in the KKK that have aberrated belief systems, and because you want them on your side, you choose not to address their problems? No, you can't do that. You have to, granted, you have to have strategy to do it, and I do my best to have strategy, but I'm not just going to placate a group of people because there happens to be so many of them. Believe me, I've done my best to be as honest as I can with the positive attributes of religion. Please see the end of the Activist Orientation Guide. True religious egalitarian values is exactly what the Venus Project and the Zeitgeist Movement is about in the general definition of all of the reciprocation notions that are present in every religion that I've ever seen, at least in part. So, and in conclusion, there is, I mentioned, possibility at some point in the future that I'm not going to make it 100%, but most likely there will be a director's cut of the film. And I'm actually going to be expanding that section. And I might paraphrase something to be a little bit more gentle with it. And I can relate to that. But it's still going to be honest. Number 41. Okay, I'm running out of time here. Regarding the transition to a resource-based economy, it is clear that most of the jobs could be either phased out or mostly automated, but what happens with those jobs that still require human labor? Let's say like a supervisor of an automated production plant. If there is no authority that forces you to do it and no need to do it, why would someone do it since that job would not make that person better in any aspect? Well, there would be a need to do it. People, as I mentioned before, would want to participate. I think there's a natural inclination for people to want to do things, and I get really tired of this constant assumption that people just won't do anything. Or they assume, based on the leisure patterns they see today, that people will just sit around and play video games, drink beer, and watch American Idol. That's a cultural phenomenon. If you want a classic example, Jacques Fresco has never made a dime off of hardly anything that he's put forward. Now, people say, well, he's an exception. Well, is he really? He would certainly tell you he isn't. The only exception to Fresco is the fact that he came out of an entirely different cultural mindset. He had a different imprinting, as he would call it, in his cultural beliefs and the way he was running composite of his life experience. I'm going to keep moving forward. I have 3 minutes. On a resource-based economy, most of the aberrant behavior would not take place, but there would still be some kind of it, especially in the early stages. I'll stop you there. Yes, of course. I'll continue. You have mentioned these people that act in an aberrant way would not be put in prisons, but instead would be treated as sick patients and be helped. Can you explain that in more detail? Who would catch them and how? Well, again, it's a perpetual state of transition, and as I think I talked about in a prior question, the police orientations, the police orientations would still have to exist in the transition. That's just the way it is. But the treatment of the individual would not be thrown into prison and everything else. They would not. Prison compounds the problems. Granted, there's always that fear of threat. To threaten people is the wrong angle. It means that there's something intrinsically wrong with the system. If you have to control society by way of threat, which is what the legal system is, then there's something inherently wrong. But let me go back to your point. Who would catch them and how the police system would catch them? And they would be caught just like anybody's caught today, but in a more humane fashion, most likely. Again, as time moves forward, it would get more and more humane. They wouldn't be brought into prison systems. They would be brought into social environments that would engage the individual and try to figure out what they're doing. Social scientists would talk to them. There is a certain degree of this that happens, in more enlightened cultures, definitely not in America. But they would take into consideration the motivations for what this person has done. They would consider. There's actually a great book that Jacques gave me, which I recommend to all of you, and it's called It's called The Show of Violence. It was written by a court psychologist, and he goes through all these serial killers that he talked to, and he knew very well, and all these strange people, and he always would explain to the court system that I want to know why these people think the way they do, so we can find the social imperative, create the social imperative to help this tendency. And that is the angle that needs to be undertaken. And I am out of time. And and I wish one day I hope I actually get through all of these questions. But anyway, I apologize for being a little lackluster today, or a little out of rhythm today. But I appreciate everybody listening, and I'm going to be in touch in 2 weeks with Jacques and Roxanne, and there'll be more developments posted on the site. And I really hope to get the media project up very, very soon. That's going to be a big point for the communication team. So I appreciate everybody listening, and I hope everyone's doing well, and take care.